Who was Slobodan Praljak? Yesterday afternoon, former Croatian General Slobodan Praljak died after drinking a poison venom at the International Hague Tribunal, who had just sentenced him for war crimes. His gesture immediately made him a martyr of Croatian nationalism, the cause that 30 years ago led him to abandon the career of theater and television director to volunteer in the army. Tonight thousands of people watched in Frost squares and in the streets of the village, holding candles and photographs of Praljak with his uniform of general. According to Croatian President Andrej Plenković, Praljak has become a witness to the profound moral injustice the tribunal has committed against the Croat people. Plenković rejects the conclusions reached by the tribunal that in the early 1990s the Croatian government and its army set up a joint criminal enterprise to kill or deport Bosnian Muslim inhabitants of the Bosnia area who wanted to join Croatia. The conflict lasted 11 months, causing thousands of deaths and tens of thousands of refugees. The fact that the Croats shortly renounced the enterprise and joined the Bosnian Muslims against Serbia had long forgotten these crimes. In the collective imagination, the Serbs of Slobodan Milosevic and Radovan Karadzic remained the only responsible for that conflict. But Praljak's gesture also had another result, which would probably be less welcome to him. Praljak was born on January 2, 1945 in Apljina, a Croat majority town in what would soon become the Socialist Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the most heterogeneous and turbulent of the 6 republics that formed the former socialist Yugoslavia. His father was an officer of the National Security Agency, and this allowed him to study at the best universities in the country. In his biography, Praljak said that he had taken 3 degrees, one in electronic engineering, one in philosophy and sociology, and then one diploma at the Academy of Dramatic Art. After graduating, she worked for a few years as a professor in a technical high school and then became a full-time artist. During the 70s and 80s he became director of the theaters of Zagreb, Osijek and Mostar. He directed television series, documentaries and films. In those years he married K.N.B.T, former wife of Goran Babić, one of the most important poets of the time. In short, he became one of the most well-known people in Zagreb's artistic and cultural environment. But when the dictator of Yugoslavia Tito died in the 1980s, and the unity of the federation began cracking, Praljak discovered another passion: politics. Praljak was an intellectual, as many of the other political and military leaders who committed war crimes in former Yugoslavia were intellectuals. Radovan Karadzic, who would become leader of the Bosnian Serbs responsible for the Srebrenica massacre, was a psychiatrist and poet who had studied in New York. When in the 1980s with Tito's death it became clear to all that the Yugoslav Federation had counted days, it was intellectual like Praljak to think it was their job to lead the compatriots to the creation of a modern and independent state, recalling and sometimes inventing a tradition nationals that their countries, which have always been subjected to the rule of foreign powers, have never had the opportunity to express themselves fully. So in 1989 Praljak participated in the founding of the Croatian Democratic Union, a nationalist formation that would dominate the country's political life for the next decade. In 1990 the party leader, Franjo Tuman, became president of Croatia. The following year he organized a referendum for independence, and after 80% of the voters expressed themselves to yes, he declared independence. Serbia, who dominated that little left of the Yugoslav Federation, replied by attacking Croatia, which had created a fought army in a few months by secretly buying arms from Hungary. Praljak then abandoned his bohemian life to enlist as a volunteer in the army. With him he brought an entire battalion, formed by the artists and intellectuals of Zagreb. In those months, the Croatian army was a brand new institution without a history and tradition, built by thousands and thousands of volunteers, somehow joined in the few paramilitary units controlled by the Croatian government. And there were a few Croats in the Yugoslav army where, traditionally, the main roles were reserved for the Serbs. So, thanks to his newly recruited political connections, Praljak was immediately appointed general. Immediately he was sent to the border with the Republic of Serbia, where the Yugoslav National Army, with its airplanes and heavy vehicles, was preparing to invade Croatia to force her to forsake her idea of independence. Since September 3, 1991, Praljak and his men began fighting to defend the city of Sunja. On paper, the clash would have to be a desirable outcome, a regular army equipped with modern armaments against a popular militia, quickly picked up and armed with second-hand equipment. However, from the very first moment, the Yugoslav army, formed mainly by conscripted Serbs and Montenegrins, suffered a very high number of disagreements. The morale of the troops was very low and in few people they wanted to kill themselves in the name of Yugoslavia, a state that was already condemned. The Yugoslav army failed to break through, and in December the front became stable. Sunja had not been conquered, but another conflict was about to burst shortly. Bosnia is the central region of former Yugoslavia and one of the poorest. At the time, as it is today, it was crossed by strong tensions between the three main communities that inhabited it: Bosniaks, Muslim religions, Croats Bosnian and Serbian Croats. At the beginning of the war, in 1991, Croats and Bosniaks were allied to Serbs, and they would have been later. But in 1992 a series of tensions began to develop between the government of the Republic of Bosnia, dominated by Muslim Bosnians, and the leaders of the Bosnian Croat communities in the western part of the country. After a series of accidents, the conflict became open and the Croat Bosnian community, HVO, militias supported by the Croatian regular army began to clash with the Bosnian army and militias. According to the latest historiography, those attacks were part of a project that Croatian leaders have been caressing for a long time. It was at least since 1991 that Tudjman and Serbian leader Milosevic met, either directly or through subordinates, to develop the division of Bosnia, he told the Post Alfredo Sasso, a researcher in contemporary history and collaborator of Observatory Balkans Caucasus. The idea of dividing Bosnia between Serbs and Croats existed at least since 1939. That Croatian leaders have these goals is one of the elements that have been recognized by the tribunal. In a way, it was a post-war prosecution for two men, who died in 1999. The conflict that came into being was particularly brutal, as it would have been shortly after that between Bosnian and Bosnian Serbs, culminating in the Srebrenica massacre. For local Croat commanders, the purpose of the war was to create ethnically homogeneous areas, inhabited only by Croatian Bosnian, which would have been easy to annex once they reached the negotiating table. Thus, when HVO troops occupied a city or village, they deported the Muslim population, imprisoning underage military males. A group of Praljak, meanwhile, one of the most important Croatian military leaders in the meantime, was for many months the official representative of the Croatian army in Bosnia, a role that exerted strong control over the Croatian Bosnian militia of the HVO.